Let's begin this unit talking about the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which was codified in 1984 and amended in 1986. This was one of the first laws or statutes that focused on electronic crime. At the time, Congress was concerned about hacking efforts against financial and government sectors. But to appreciate these two statements, however, we have to think back to what the Internet was in 1984. So let's start this unit off with a little history lesson. It kind of frames the discussion on the CFAA, and it shows how forward-thinking the lawmakers were at the time. So the question I pose to you is, what was the Internet before iPhones and Chromebooks? Prior to the Internet, computers were either standalone computers, which had a very secure protocol for sharing data. I would copy it onto a floppy disk drive and walk it over to the other computer and copy it there. Fairly secure networking. However, some computers talk to each other using proprietary networking protocols, such as the system's network architecture used by IBM or developed by IBM in 1974. It was a complete networking protocol that could link computers together and they could talk. There was a lot of overhead, though, in bringing the SNA network to life. The concept of the Internet goes back even further than this, though. In 1962, J.C.R. Licklider, who was the head of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, proposed the concept of the galactic network, this very science fiction titled concept of linking computers and computers talking to each other. He published a series of memos on the interconnection of a large number of computers at a global scale. What does that sound like? His intergalactic computer network followed on the heels of Leonard Kleinrock's research on packet switching. Now, when you think about it, to connect all those computers together in that intergalactic computer network, you needed to have some way for those computers to convey information to each other. And packet switching was one of the first steps in that direction. Larry Roberts and Tom Merrill linked two computers together using packet switching between Lincoln Labs in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the System Development Corporation in Santa Monica, California. These were the first two computers to talk to each other over a phone link. For those of you who go back far enough to remember the first 300 baud modems, you can imagine how slow and painful this must have been. But as we always see in the computer world, that next step forward seems like very large leaps forward. And at the time, to communicate over that phone link was amazing. The response times are slow, and there was really no guarantee of reliability, but they were connected. They published a paper in 1966 about their efforts. The ARPANET was funded in 1968. So Bolt, Beranek, and Newman Company developed the interface message processors, which would connect nodes to a network. UCLA and Stanford were the first two research labs that were connected in such a way. The nodes continued to be added to ARPANET, and in 1969 we were up to a whopping 4 in total. But we needed some kind of communication protocol, sort of like a network control protocol, which was developed in 1972. After we started seeing computers connecting to the network, we started to hear this concept of the next hot application. I remember these conversations well. The next hot application. What would be the next hot application that would be applied to computer operations? Well, the ARPANET demonstrated the first of these in 1972. It was something called email. It allowed two computers to send and receive messages from each other. And the software was very simple at the time. You either sent software you sent a message or you received a message. And it was very easy in those days to actually programmatically build your message and send it out, because the software really just accepted or received the message. The development of the transmission control protocol, Internet protocol, in the 1970s was accomplished by two men, Robert Kahn and Vint Cerf, who you'll hear often as sort of the grandfathers of the Internet. This was the standard networking protocol adopted by ARPANET. In 1977, a three-network connection was made between the US, England, and Norway. Now you're thinking of not connecting two computers, but connecting two networks of computers. In March of 1982, the U.S. Department of Defense declared TCP/IP as the standard for all military computer networking. Notice at this point that we're still 2 years before the codification of the CFAA, 2 years before that law came out. And at the time, around March of 1982, it was estimated that there might be around, I've seen statistics as low as 60,000 computers connected to the network. Now that number may be off a fraction, but it was a very small network of computers at the time. In the 1980s, the primary use of ARPANET was research-oriented. However, the Internet service providers began offering commercial access to the computers, and this is where the growth of the Internet began. My company, for instance, connected to the Internet network at this point in time. It allowed us to communicate with offices in other parts of the country, and it allowed us to use email service to communicate between those various offices. Now, keep in mind, we're not talking about the way you think of networks connected today. There was quite an effort to be able to hook your computers into a mechanism that would allow you to communicate over this network of computers. In 1990, the commercialization of the network was in full swing. We had companies like CompuServe and AUL out there servicing commercial clients. However, there was one major innovation missing from this equation, one additional hot application that needed to be put into place before this intergalactic network could actually take place. And Tim Berners-Lee, a researcher at the CERN in Switzerland, developed what he called the hypertext language to link documents across this network. This resulted in what was called the World Wide Web. In fact, when you type in a link and you type in www, World Wide Web. And again, the early days, this was really meant to tie one document to another. But you can imagine the leap that people realized when I could have something of a sort of a document that linked to all my other documents. And that became what was in essence a web page, which could then connect to other web pages, which could connect to other content or documents. This provided that seamless connectivity between the documents on the site, and it provided visual context to the information that existed on your site. This was a giant leap. So between TCP/IP, that interconnection using packet switching, and hypertext language, we can now build sites that bring business value to the network. 1995, the Federal Networking Council passed a resolution defining the term Internet. referring to a global information system that logically links by a unique address based on the Internet Protocol, and allows computers to communicate using the TCP/IP protocol suite. This provides, uses, and makes available services layered on top of that TCP/IP. When I think back over the development of the Internet, one of the first commercial, and this may not be the first, but it's the first that I remember, the first commercial use of the Internet was Toyota advertising their vehicles on the Internet. Now, there may have been others, and somebody may very well come up with a different example, but I remember with amazement how, when I saw this commercial of Toyota vehicles on the Internet, how I understood now that the Internet had real business value.